This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include political consultant from down east, Doug Raymond. Welcome back. John Hood from the John Locke Foundation. Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former House Speaker, representative from Nash and Edgecombe counties, Joe Mavretic. Well, this week in Raleigh, the House, Senate, and gubernatorial conferees were trying to hammer out details of the budget and tax plan for our state. But we want to talk about the increasing criticism of the legislature, a report card showing how well we are doing in public infrastructure, the growing schism between urban and rural areas, and whether we're committed to the Common Core curriculum in our state. Before we get started, though, all of us learned this week of the passing of former Governor Jim Holshouser, the first Republican governor in the 20th century. And I want to begin the program by asking each of our panelists just to give us a second or two in remembrance, personal remembrance or significance of Jim Holshouser. Doug, we'll start with you.
Well, I think universally when you hear Jim Holshouser, you're going to hear terms like honest and humble, but a couple of things from a historian's point of view when I look at it, I think a lot of times he gets lumped into being the right place at the right time, riding Nixon's coattails, but people forget what a huge upset that was in the primary over Jim Gardner, and that was really the beginning of that Republican Revolution.
John?
I got to know Governor Holshouser pretty well over the years, talked to him a lot. In all the conversations I had with him, I think he was angry with me once, and I could barely tell.
Yeah.
He was a very calm, polite, and very funny man, and
yes.
I think that's what I'll remember most about him.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't understand he had such a great sense of humor. Chris?
Well, I also knew him some, and I think I hadn't talked to him many times. I think he was a statesman. I think the fact that he opened a law firm with Terry Sanford shows you that it was a little bit of a different era. Two, I think, very important figures in our history working closely together. He did defeat Jim Gardner. I think he was sort of a throwback to the Republicans that some folks think have disappeared and reflected a new political climate. But I have nothing but respect and praise for him. I thought he was a wonderful public servant.
Joe?
The thing that intrigues me about him as the governor is all of the marvelous things he did across a wide spectrum without succession and without the veto.
And with a Democratic legislature.
Well, I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I'm like John. I got to know him fairly well through the years, primarily through Harlan Boyles. But I'll have to say that it just amazed me when we were talking once about that 1972 election, and he said, a lot of people think Nixon won that election for me, or even Jesse Helms, because it was his first term. He said, actually, George McGovern did it. North Carolina voted against George McGovern. Great, wonderful guy. We're going to miss him. Well, since 2010, we've witnessed a dramatic shift in state government. It started when Republicans took control of both the House and the Senate and culminated when Pat McCrory won the governor's election. The turnaround in the approach, financing, and involvement of the state in public policy issues shocked some, angered others, and left the rest baffled. It comes as no surprise that Democrats and a lot of newspaper writers are upset with what's been taking place, but lawmakers are coming under fire from some sources that don't normally publicly comment, like UNC President Tom Ross, in remarks to the UNC Board of Governors, now controlled almost exclusively by Republicans, after July, almost totally by Republicans. Ross said the budget that the House had passed had sobering implications for education. Chris, the university receives a lot of its funding from the legislature. Wasn't it kind of surprising to you to hear Tom Ross, known such an even temperament kind of guy, lash out at the House?
Well, I'm not sure it's fair to say lashing out. He also thanked the House budget for funding some of the new strategic directions initiative that a study committee came up with and the Board of Governors introduced. But it is fair that he did criticize the House budget. He pointed out, for example, that 11 of 12 southeastern states, almost all of whom are controlled by Republican governors, many by Republican legislatures, actually increased funding in public universities this year, and we're cutting it again after cutting $400 million a couple of years ago. And it's not just Tom Ross, I think it's important. Fred Eshelman, who was a funder of the Republican campaigns, was head on a group called Real Jobs NC that gave a lot of money, that elected a lot of these Republicans. He actually raised concerns at the same meeting, wondering why the university hasn't been more aggressive in stating its case and trying to get more money. So I think it's interesting. I don't think it's just Tom Ross and not just Democrats. There are a lot of university supporters of both parties who are worried.
This legislature, though, is coming under fire from a lot of sources, and I guess that's some of it is to be expected. We've talked about the ongoing Moral Monday demonstrations taking place, but last week the annual conference of the United Methodist Church passed a resolution highly critical of the legislature for its position. Joe, can you ever remember a time when a whole denomination took such an action?
No, I can't, and I think that they have to be a bit careful that they don't become involved in the political arenas, violating church and state, and also giving credence to those in the General Assembly who say, why does the church enjoy so many tax-free benefits?
Doug, a lot of legislative leaders seem to be shrugging off the criticism that they're getting from the media, especially from newspapers, because they think the print media is pretty biased. Are they getting a fair shake in the media, do you think? Is the print media more biased against them than TV or radio?
Somewhat, but I think you're exactly right. I was thinking the same thing, that they really are shrugging it off, and from the ones that from leadership on down to the worker bees, I haven't seen a lot of concern. They feel like in their hearts they're doing what they were elected to do, and they're going to move forward with it. And to be truthful, there's a lot of times that I've gone to them and say, hey, did you see what they, and they're not even reading the papers. So I think shrugging it off is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and to dovetail on what Doug was saying, John, when you talk to these guys, they're basically saying, hey, we were elected to change the course of state government, and we are doing it, and we're on task, and we're going about this job. They authorized to do this. They believe anytime you get this big a change in direction that there's going to be some pushback and some feedback. Are they right?
Absolutely, they're right. This is the first time in more than a century, well more than a century, the Republicans have had both the executive and legislative branches. Democrats have been in control of public policy in North Carolina for many decades. It isn't just people in office, it's all the people that are commenting. Tom Ross, I like Tom Ross. He is hardly a nonpartisan source. He's a partisan Democrat, very involved for years in building the liberal organizations as the head of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, and involved in Democratic Party politics. And you see that in the newspapers and the TV stations and a lot of the other institutions that are weighing in. They have every right to do so, but let's not pretend this is anything other than what it is. Republicans believe they've got elected, they have an agenda. It's very different from what has been happening in Raleigh. People in Raleigh, people who are associated with state politics, are resisting that because it's different from what they're used to.
Let's point out, though, that roughly half the people in North Carolina voted for Democrats for the legislature. Roughly half. Because of the gerrymandered districts, we have supermajorities in the House and the Senate. So part of this is North Carolina. I don't believe North Carolina voters for this. They may have been unhappy with the way things were going. I don't believe, and I think the election results show this, they weren't voting for this radical a change all the way down the line on so many issues.
Well, and Joe, 2014 is a year away. There are a lot of these legislators that will tell you, hey, look, all this furor, all this hubbub that's being caused right now, by the time the November 2014 elections come, they'll have forgotten about it.
I'm not so sure about that. But what Chris is going at, I look at a different way. Hartman has a law, and it says never make more people angry, never create more enemies than you can handle at the time. And where the Republicans have to be careful is in the middle. And if the middle is dissatisfied with too much too soon, those first and second term members of the House and Senate go bye-bye. And the
PPP poll that was just released indicates that that is a problem area for them. Whether, again, it'll affect the 2014 elections or not, we'll have to see. You can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so you can view it anytime you like. And while at ncspin.com, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. 3 ways to keep the conversation going: ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, and Spin Cycle. We look forward to hearing from you. When we come back, we're going to talk about infrastructure in North Carolina.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
Resident lenders of North Carolina are licensed providers of safe and responsible financial services. Existing regulations limit consumer choice. It's time to modernize consumer finance laws. Learn more at ResponsibleLoansNC.com.
There's a new day dawning for our state. A fresh crop of leaders are bringing conservative reform. Gone are the days of billion-dollar deficits, and the threat of Obamacare minimized. Now they're working to get our economy on track by holding the line on spending, cutting taxes, passing tax reform that's smart and fair. Let's get back in the game, North Carolina. Encourage our new leaders to keep going.
We now return to NC Spin.
The American Society for Civil Engineers released their latest report card on infrastructure in North Carolina. Our state got an overall grade of C, the same as we received in 2009. Our highest ranking was a B- on energy sector, followed by a C+ grade on rail. Eyebrows were raised, however, when roads received a C compared to a grade of D- in 29. Question one to Doug. Our state's gained more than 300,000 residents since that 2009 report was issued and has done very little in infrastructure improvement. Are people right to be questioning this report card?
I think on the surface they are, but if you read the narrative that's included with it, it gives overall, says the roads are fair to good in North Carolina. But I think what they mention that there has been significant investment in the last 4 years, but I think the grade may reflect pretty much that they feel like North Carolina has done a good job with what they had during the recession, when there were limited funds, that they did a good job what they had. And you have to remember, too, when you look at this group, it gave America as a whole, I think, a D, and the roads. And the best score they gave for the United States was a B- for solid waste. When, there's a joke there that I'll leave alone.
Tom,
but
the civil engineers study actually does track with what other studies show, including federal data, which shows that in recent years, North Carolina's bridge quality has improved and our road quality has improved.
We've been working on bridges a lot.
Now, interstate congestion is still a real problem. Unfortunately, we still have some of the most congested interstate lanes in the U.S., which surprises people, but is true. But in other areas, there really have been improvements. Some of that, to be fair, should be attributable to the latter stages of the Easley administration and the Perdue administration, when they began to change how the Department of Transportation spent money. In fact, Perdue restructured DOT, and she deserves some credit for some of the progress that has happened since then.
Joe, Governor McCrory has repeatedly said that infrastructure was one of his highest priorities. After reading this report, should he back away from that a little bit?
No, I don't think so. I think it's one of his priorities because it's one of his strongest suits that he brought to North Carolina from his experience in Charlotte. I've been watching these reports since the early 80s, and I think they've been very consistent. And what concerns me more than highways, because that's visible, is what you can't see below the ground. And those pipes below the ground are in sad shape, and they're getting worse every day.
Most of them are 50 to 75 years old.
And we're going to start having some serious water and sewer problems in North Carolina.
But Chris, to that point, they graded drinking water a C compared to a B minus in 2009, saying that we need to spend $10 billion on it. The Rural Center said we needed to spend $30 billion on the next 20 years. The Clean Water Trust Fund is out of money, threatened foreclosure. There are few federal matching funds available now for water system. Is there some significant improvement here we don't know anything about?
No, I mean, I think what we're sort of dancing around a little bit, and I think the governor referred to a little bit in the campaign, and others have talked about at some point, I think we're going to see a public works bond issue. I don't think it'll be this year. It may not be this session, but I think maybe before the McCrory administration ends, I think you'll see some sort of bond issue put together that will address some, not all these things. But I think we need to be realistic about it. Sometimes when people who build things put out a report saying you need to build a lot of things, there's some self-interest at stake. But I do agree we have huge infrastructure needs. We have huge. I think our highways, we have congestion. We still have bridges that need repair, even though we've done better. So there's plenty of things that we've fallen behind on. The problem, of course, is how are we going to pay for it? How are you going to finance it? We've talked on the show before about the dwindling gas tax because people are having more cost or gas-efficient cars. So it's very complicated, but I think we'll see a bond issue in the next couple of years.
And Doug, to that, so far as it goes, we got all these needs. He's talking about the fact we may have a public infrastructure bond program, but in point of fact, nobody wants to pay for any of this, do they?
Exactly.
No tax increases, no tolls,
You'd have to do quite a selling job to get that bond passed, but I think Chris's one point was great. I mean, you've got civil engineers calling for more building of infrastructure. I think they have a vested interest in that happening.
I think they do, but the truth is that most of us know that it's a huge need.
Yeah, I think even if you cut the report in half as far as funds needed, what we really need is a bond issue, and the reason is that when you redo infrastructure, you're not doing it for today, but you're doing it for anywhere from 30 to 50 years out, and the people who use that infrastructure the next 30 to 50 years ought to be part of the payment.
Well, we'll be talking about that part more, I'm sure. When we come back after these messages, the urban-rural schism.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
We all count on our community hospitals. But what if, due to continued government cuts, our hospitals had to limit their services? What if it took twice as long for your family to reach an emergency room? What if our hospitals could no longer afford to deliver babies? What if our community hospitals simply had to close their doors? We need to make sure our community hospitals and the services we count on do not disappear.
Resident lenders of North Carolina are licensed providers of safe and responsible financial services. Existing regulations limit consumer choice. It's time to modernize consumer finance laws. Learn more at ResponsibleLoansNC.com.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Students of history will note we've always witnessed shifts in our population. In North Carolina, those shifts have resulted in radically different realities between rural and urban areas. The loss of people in rural North Carolina has resulted in fewer cultural, educational, and health opportunities in rural areas, but now a waning influence in our government, too, and budget priorities that reflect that loss of influence. Joe, for much of our state's history, Eastern legislators wielded great power in state government. We've talked before on this show how that power has shifted. Who are today's rural champions, and what's the outlook for rural North Carolina?
Well, we don't have any rural champions in the House or the Senate today, and the outlook for the rural areas, particularly in the East, is soddy. What our viewers ought to take away from this topic is that North Carolina now is a state where there are about 13 or 14 MSAs and the rest of it. And if you look at...
Two North Carolinas.
Right, well, MSAs and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And those MSAs cover about 40 of the counties and by far the majority of the population. If you look at poverty, poverty really is concentrated east of I-95 with the exception of Vance and Warren counties. Then it goes straight across those counties that butt up against Virginia and end at the Chowan River and drop down a little bit to Hertford County and Edgecombe County and Terrell County. And then way down on I-95, you got Robeson County and Columbus. Now, in the House and the Senate, all of those 10 poor counties are represented by Democrats, both on the House side and the Senate side, with the exception of Terrell, which has a Republican first-term member in the House. Now, given the makeup of the House, the MSA influence, there is really no long-term hope for those 10 counties.
Doug, this is the first time most of us can remember when either the governor, the House Speaker, or the Senate Pro Tem didn't come from, or powerful legislative chairs, didn't come from east of I-95. Have the days gone when we're going to have powerful legislative leaders from the east?
I don't think so. And if you look down the roll, the Senate's in a little bit better shape than the House. You've got Harry Brown, who's from the east. Lewis Pate is in a leadership position from the east. And some of the up-and-comers, Buck Newton out of Wilson, who also represents Johnston, the rural portions of Johnston and Nash County, has really become quite a leader in the Senate in a very short period of time. It's the House side where there's really just a void of anybody from the east. My representative, Pat McElrath from the coast, and Carteret and also Jones is really the only one from the east in any kind of leadership
Chris,
position.
some of the rural legislators are talking about the possibility of forming a rural caucus. What do you think of that idea? Is it going to help them any?
I mean, it can't hurt. It's not a bad idea to talk about what are the communities of interest, a term we've used on this show before, and maybe work together across party lines on some issues. But, you know, what happens, we have a governor from Charlotte, we have a Speaker of the House from the Charlotte metropolitan area, we have a House Rules Chair the Senate Rules Chair from a metropolitan area, the Asheville area, Hendersonville. So urban interests clearly dominate the legislature in leadership, but they just don't dominate in leadership. They dominate in numbers, regardless of which party's in control. If the Democrats ever retake control of the legislature, the thing, what occurs to me, we talked about it and Joe raised it last time on the show, a lot of the ideas sound like they make sense, but for example, Governor McCrory's transportation reform talks about roads of statewide importance, and Joe raised it. I thought it was fascinating. What does that mean? I'm guessing it doesn't mean much to folks east of 95. So just the way we define terms, we define everything has completely changed, and I don't see it changing back.
John, let's extend these trend lines: the loss of population, the shift in population to urban North Carolina. Most of the counties losing population, if we said, have come from the rural areas. How is this continued loss of population going to impact education, health, other services to the area, and ultimately impact the state?
Well, remember that all the fast-growing areas where all the people are coming have big problems with education and water and sewer and transportation. Apparently, if you have slow growth, it's bad. If you have fast growth, it's bad. If you're stagnant, it's bad. If I may ask an impolite question at this point, if we've had all these decades of time when Eastern power brokers have been in charge in Raleigh or had significant power in Raleigh, and the East is in desperate straits, maybe their ideas weren't very good, and maybe we should try some new ideas.
We'll discuss that on a later show. After we come back, we're going to talk about the Common Core.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
We all count on our community hospitals. But what if, due to continued government cuts, our hospitals had to limit their services? What if it took twice as long for your family to reach an emergency room? What if our hospitals could no longer afford to deliver babies? What if our community hospitals simply had to close their doors? We need to make sure our community hospitals and the services we count on do not disappear.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com.
I didn't want us to end the show on this discussion of rural-urban schisms without asking the question of our panel, what happens if we don't do anything? What's going to take place if nothing gets done for the rural problems? John, I'm going to start with you.
Well, the problems will get worse, but I don't think nothing is really an alternative. Obviously, the legislature is working on the issue, maybe just different from the past legislatures did.
I think the many MSAs around New Bern, Kinston, Morehead City, Goldsboro will continue to grow. Chris?
I think people are going to suffer even more than they're suffering now. I think we need wiser and I think better and more targeted investments, and we need to make sure the safety net is still operating because there have been new holes being ripped in it every day.
Doug?
The smaller areas will have smaller problems that they'll be able to handle. Some of the bigger areas, I think you're going to see more people added to the government roles, and then they'll have to deal with it.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when NC Spin will take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.